Imagine this. You're standing on a stage under blinding lights, the crowd before you murmuring with anticipation. You've spent years preparing for this moment, perfecting your speech, shaping your posture, smoothing your flaws until they gleam with practiced charm. But just as you begin to speak, the room shifts, the faces in the crowd blur. Applause turns to indifference. Your voice, so carefully refined, evaporates into silence. And deep inside, an echo whispers, "You are not enough." What if this wasn't a dream, but a metaphor for your entire life? From the earliest moments we step into society, we are handed masks, expectations, roles, identities we didn't ask for but must wear. Be confident. Be successful. Be kind but assertive. Humble but accomplished. Independent but not alone. We are caught in a web of contradictions, forced to climb a ladder that extends forever upward, always one rung beyond reach. But what if the problem isn't you? Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That's because, in a fractured world, self-acceptance isn't rewarded, it's punished. To be truly yourself is to become alien in a society that thrives on conformity. Every system, social, economic, spiritual, has its own implicit ideal, and deviation becomes failure. You're not just expected to be, you're expected to perform, to produce, to improve endlessly. The world is broken, not because of individual malice, but because the very blueprint we follow is flawed. It's a structure that measures human worth by metrics external to the soul: productivity, popularity, net worth, aesthetic perfection. You're told you must become good enough. But that very phrase is a mirage, constantly receding the closer you get. It shifts shape depending on who you ask, and worse, depending on when you ask. Nietzsche saw this coming. He wrote, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." But what happens when the why handed to you is rooted in illusion? When the how becomes unbearable because it demands your disintegration? It's not just that you're not good enough, it's that the world refuses to define what enough even means in any coherent way. You chase status and are called shallow. You seek depth and are labeled pretentious. You pursue comfort and are deemed lazy. You grind for success and are accused of being heartless. No matter your path, there is a shadow cast upon it. A suspicion, a judgment, a quiet disdain. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a reflection of a deeper societal sickness. You are living in a culture that sells you self-worth like a product, something to be earned, displayed, envied. The soul under this paradigm becomes transactional. And in that transaction, something essential is always lost. Arthur Schopenhauer captured this despair when he observed, "A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants." In other words, even your desires are manipulated. The values you internalize were not chosen, they were inherited, marketed, shaped by forces that have little interest in your actual flourishing. And yet, you try, you push harder, you become more efficient, more polished, more aligned with whatever the current ideal demands. And still, the void persists. That quiet voice returns, insidious, intimate. You are not enough. Why? Because in a world that worships surfaces, the depth of your being is a threat. The more whole you become, the more incompatible you feel. You begin to sense that the culture wasn't built for someone like you. Someone who asks, who feels, who dares to want more than illusion. This leads us to a terrifying conclusion. The reason you never feel good enough isn't a personal failure. It's a consequence of trying to become whole in a system that only values fragments. What if the problem isn't that you are broken, but that you are trying to remain human in a world that profits from your fracture? There's a moment, often subtle, when the soul starts to fracture, not from trauma or tragedy, but from relentless measurement. It begins when you are compared, graded, ranked, scored, labeled. Every effort you make, every part of your being, becomes a data point in an invisible spreadsheet you never agreed to enter. It starts early. Your intelligence is not something sacred, it's a percentile. Your creativity, a checkbox. Your worthiness of attention, love, even safety, is filtered through assessments. If you conform well, you're rewarded. If not, the system tightens like a noose. And somewhere along the way, the question shifts from, who am I becoming? To, how do I appear? Performance replaces authenticity. Depth is sacrificed at the altar of optics. Aldous Huxley warned us in Brave New World, the world's stable now. People are happy. They get what they want, and they never want what they can't get. But what if you don't feel happy? What if the stability feels like a cage? What if the constant stream of dopamine, distraction, and digital validation leaves you empty instead of whole? You start to realize the machinery doesn't care how you feel. It only registers what can be measured. How many followers? How many hours worked? What's your productivity rate? How many goals achieved? Likes received? Trophies displayed? And yet, none of those numbers can hold you when you're alone in the dark, staring into the ceiling, wondering if anyone truly sees you. This is the silent violence of the measurable world. It ignores the immeasurable. No statistic can quantify compassion. No algorithm detects your quiet grief. No resume captures your resilience through personal devastation. And no selfie, no post, no pixel-perfect image can reflect the trembling, sacred chaos of your inner world. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But what if what you try to make is constantly rejected unless it fits into categories the world already understands? Categories that were not designed for your complexity, but for your utility. We are living in what could be called a meritocratic dystopia, where the myth is that anyone can become anything if they just try hard enough. But meritocracy rarely accounts for context, only outcomes. You could be burning from both ends and still be told it's not enough. You could be traumatized, marginalized, unseen, and the world responds, try harder. And when you finally break, emotionally, spiritually, even physically, the system doesn't ask what hurt you. It asks, why didn't you endure more? The irony is, we are more interconnected than ever, yet increasingly lonely, trapped in curated realities where everyone else seems to be thriving. And so, the comparison deepens, the measurements tighten, and the feeling of inadequacy begins to feel permanent. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. That distraction becomes another measurement. Are you having enough fun? Are you living your best life? The commodification of happiness becomes yet another prison, disguised as freedom. This is why you'll never be good enough in a world governed by measurement, because your value cannot be distilled into metrics. And yet, this world insists on doing just that, compressing your wholeness into spreadsheets, your spirit into stats, your soul into scale. And if you resist, if you speak out, slow down, or dare to be still, you are labeled inefficient, unmotivated, irrelevant. But maybe the deeper truth is this: the more deeply human you become, the more incompatible you are with a society that runs on inhuman rules. So what happens to a person who cannot win at a game they never chose to play? Do they shatter, or do they begin to awaken? Because beyond this machinery, beyond this empire of measurement, lies a forbidden possibility that your worth has nothing to do with how you are ranked, and everything to do with how you exist. But that kind of truth, it can't be found in numbers. It can only be found in the fire that comes when you begin to question the game itself. You don't need the world to tell you you're not enough. Not anymore. Because somewhere along the way, the external voice became internal, crawled beneath your skin. Now it speaks in your own tone, using your own memories, echoing in your own thoughts. It doesn't shout. It whispers so intimately, so consistently, you forget it isn't really you. That's how the lie takes root. Not as an idea, but as identity. You wake up feeling behind. You look in the mirror and see not a face, but flaws. Your inner dialogue reads like a cruel manager's performance review. Why are you so lazy today? Why aren't you doing more? Why can't you just be like them? Them, the others, the invisible crowd you compare yourself to daily. People who seem to be living lives of unstoppable momentum, who wake up early, run companies, maintain perfect relationships, and still have time for green smoothies and glowing skin. But you're exhausted just being. Schopenhauer's words strike the bone here. We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people. You begin shaving off the inconvenient parts of your personality, trimming your truth to fit the mold. And still, the mold rejects you. Still, you're told it's not quite right. Still, the approval doesn't come. So you try again. Better, smarter, nicer, thinner, funnier, quieter, louder. You change yourself so many times, you forget what the original looked like. And here lies the tragedy. You begin to believe the lie. Not just that you're not enough, but that you were never meant to be. This is where the real war begins, not with the world, but within yourself. Every part of you that doesn't conform becomes an enemy. Your sensitivity becomes weakness. Your introspection becomes laziness. Your uncertainty becomes a flaw to be fixed, not a space to be explored. The system doesn't have to oppress you anymore. You've learned to police yourself. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The belief that you are inherently inadequate becomes your compass. It points you toward toxic relationships, overwork, perfectionism, and spiritual numbness. And all the while, you tell yourself this is just how life is. This is how you are. But stop and ask, where did that belief come from? You weren't born feeling insufficient. As a child, you didn't question your right to sing, to scream, to play, to rest. That voice inside, the one that cuts and measures and doubts, was taught to you. It's an inheritance of shame. It came from a world that fears wholeness because wholeness cannot be controlled. It's easier to manage a population that hates itself. Easier to sell products to people who are afraid of their own reflections. Easier to manipulate when insecurity becomes the default setting. And yet, despite all this, something in you resists. A flicker, a rebellion, a strange ache that says, "This isn't right, this isn't me." But you suppress it, because to listen, to truly listen, might mean everything you've worked for, built, believed, could unravel. But isn't that what healing sometimes requires? Viktor Frankl believed that suffering, when given meaning, could transform. He said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." But here's the twist. Changing yourself doesn't always mean self-improvement. Sometimes it means self-return. Peeling back the layers of programming, questioning the voice, unlearning the lie. And that process is violent, not in a physical sense, but existentially, because to remove a false identity is to be naked in the world again. It's to ask, who am I without this voice? Without the hunger for approval? Without the mask of constant performance? And maybe the most terrifying question of all, if I stop trying to be good enough, what's left of me? That's the threshold. That's where the transformation begins. But to cross it, you must first face the possibility that you've spent your life fighting a war based on a lie. The world didn't break you. It taught you to break yourself. But what if you stopped? To stop striving, to pause, to rest, to simply be, feels like a betrayal. Not of your values, but of the entire architecture of the world around you. As if daring to find yourself worthy without condition is an act of spiritual treason. Because in a system built on lack, wholeness is heresy. Everywhere you turn, you're reminded that there's something missing. Advertisements speak the language of insufficiency. You could be more. You could look better, live better, be better. Self-help books preach optimization as salvation. Social media offers endless highlight reels, each one whispering the same message in different clothes. You are not enough, but you could be if you try harder. But what if the deepest truth is the most dangerous one? That nothing is missing. That you were never meant to be anything but what you already are, unfiltered, imperfect, irreducible. To believe that, however, is to become a threat. Not just to others, but to the very economy of inadequacy that fuels modern life. If people stopped believing they were broken, what would happen to the industries built on fixing them? What would happen to the quiet social contract? We all pretend we're almost enough, so we don't have to admit we're terrified we'll never be. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you, but freedom is terrifying. Because once you stop chasing worth through external validation, you are left with yourself." And that self, long buried under layers of performance, can feel like a stranger. It's easier to chase, to upgrade, to optimize, to measure progress and call it purpose. But that's not wholeness. That's maintenance. That's survival. Wholeness is something else entirely. It's embracing contradiction. It's holding space for grief and joy, rage and tenderness, success and failure. Not as opposites, but as necessary companions. It's stepping out of the binary of good enough and not enough, and into the wild, sacred uncertainty of being. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." This solitude isn't just physical, it's existential. It's the space where the world's noise fades, and your real voice begins to speak. But that voice often doesn't sound triumphant. It's not the heroic anthem we're taught to expect. It's softer, sadder, tired from years of being ignored. It doesn't scream, "I am enough." It asks quietly, "Will you still love me if I'm not?" And in that moment, you understand the true weight of wholeness. Because to accept yourself fully is to grieve what the world has done to you. It's to mourn the years spent chasing a moving target. It's to realize that the hunger to be enough was never yours to begin with. It was inherited, indoctrinated, sold to you piece by piece. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. And suddenly, the world starts to shift. The goals that once drove you feel hollow. The voices that once commanded you lose their power. The mirrors you used to fear no longer define you. You don't have to reject beauty, success, or ambition, but you no longer let them decide your worth. This is what the system cannot tolerate. A person who no longer needs it to feel whole. A person who can walk into a room without shrinking or performing. A person who does not ask for permission to exist. Wholeness becomes a revolution, not loud, but irreversible. But there is a cost. You will be misunderstood, labeled arrogant, lazy, unstable, even dangerous. Because those still in the machinery will see your refusal to self-destroy as betrayal. Your peace will trigger their unrest. Your self-trust will be mistaken for delusion. Your freedom will be misread as threat. That's the paradox. To reclaim your humanity is to become foreign to the world. And yet, isn't that a sign you're doing something right? There's a peculiar silence that descends after awakening. An eerie stillness that wraps itself around you the moment you stop pretending. Not relief, not celebration, but exile. You expected liberation to feel like triumph. Instead, it feels like loss. You've stepped outside the fortress of performance, shed the armor of assimilation, and found yourself in the wilderness. Alone. This is the part they never tell you. That becoming whole doesn't make you more accepted. It often makes you more alien. Because the world is not designed to welcome the fully conscious. It's built to accommodate the compliant. You begin noticing the subtle ways people pull away, not because they're cruel, but because your presence makes them uncomfortable. Your refusal to play the game reflects the lie of it all, and not everyone is ready to see it. Some will mock your change. Others will pity you. A few will feel threatened and call you unstable, even narcissistic. But what they are really reacting to is your refusal to need their approval. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also knew that privilege often feels like punishment at first. To become yourself is to peel away everything the world taught you to be. And that process is not tidy. It is not pretty. It's disorienting, painful, and deeply, profoundly lonely. Why? Because for years you belonged to a tribe. Even if it was dysfunctional, even if it demanded your silence and your suffering, it was familiar. To step out of that is to lose your place, your map, your myth. And the myth was comforting. It said, if you do X, you will be loved. If you become Y, you will be safe. If you deny Z, you will belong. It was never true, but it felt true. And that illusion was, for a long time, enough to survive. Now that illusion has shattered. And all that's left is the terrifying truth. There is no guaranteed love, no promised safety, no simple belonging for those who wake up. This is where many turn back. Not because they lack courage, but because the silence of authenticity can feel louder than the noise of conformity. It's tempting to re-enter the machinery, to readopt the mask, to chase applause over alignment, to be seen rather than felt. But for those who choose to remain in the wilderness, something else begins to emerge. A new kind of belonging, not based on roles or rewards, but resonance. A sacred resonance that only occurs when two people drop their masks and see each other fully, even if only for a moment. It's rare, but it's real. And once you taste it, you realize it's worth everything you lost. Nietzsche, ever unafraid of existential fire, wrote, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. You are hearing a different music now, one composed not of metrics or mandates, but meaning, the kind of meaning that cannot be monetized or measured, only lived. But dancing to that music means risking everything. Your reputation, your comfort, your familiar narratives, even your sanity, at least how the world defines it. And yet, in the silence of exile, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. Not the inner critic, not the anxious performer, but the ancient voice beneath all the noise. The one that speaks not in commands, but in invitations. Rest, breathe, feel, live. You start noticing the sky again, the feel of rain on your skin, the way grief arrives unannounced and leaves you hollow, but somehow more honest. You begin reclaiming emotions you buried. Rage, tenderness, longing, awe. None of them are clean, but they are real. And real is enough now. In a world addicted to filters, your rawness becomes sacred. But don't expect applause. Don't expect understanding. Expect only this, a slow, aching integration. A life less about spectacle, more about substance. Less about chasing, more about coming home. And perhaps that's the truest measure of awakening. Not that you feel complete, but that you no longer feel compelled to prove that you are. The final illusion is this, that being enough is the end goal. That once you reach a certain level of healed or wise or productive or loved, you'll be complete. Untouchable, unshakable, finally safe. But what if the real liberation comes not from being enough, but from realizing you never had to be? That there was never a final version of you waiting to be unlocked like some hidden achievement. That the constant striving wasn't growth, it was a distraction. That the hunger for validation, the craving for perfection, the fear of inadequacy were all symptoms of the same sickness. The belief that your value is conditional. Let that collapse. Let the fantasy burn down, even if it leaves you standing in the ash of all your aspirations. Because in those ashes, something real can finally grow. You see, when you give up the goal of being enough, you reclaim your right to simply be. And in that being, in the raw messiness of existence, something sacred takes root. Freedom. Not the kind sold by advertisers or promised in slogans, but existential freedom, the kind Sartre spoke of when he said, "Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." Condemned, yes, but also blessed, because in that terrifying freedom is the permission to live a life that isn't optimized, categorized, or even understood by others. A life where your sadness isn't pathology. It's part of your humanity. Where your failures don't subtract from your worth, they prove it. Where your contradictions aren't flaws to be corrected, but complexity to be honored. This isn't the freedom of the ego. It's the freedom of the soul. A freedom that says, you don't have to heal perfectly. You don't have to forgive everything. You don't have to find your purpose in order to be valid. You don't have to constantly grow to matter. You don't even have to love yourself all the time. You only have to show up as you are, again and again, with your uncertainty, with your rage, with your tired hands and trembling voice and broken heart. That is enough, not as a slogan, not as a self-help cliche, but as a radical act of defiance in a world that demands your compliance. Viktor Frankl once said, "The meaning of life is to give life meaning, not to find it, not to earn it, but to give it, daily, deliberately, sometimes painfully, sometimes without applause. Meaning is not a mountain to climb, it's a garden to tend, with crooked hands and aching knees and no promise of harvest. And yet, you keep planting, because that, too, is freedom, to live even when life doesn't perform for you, to love even when love doesn't save you, to create even when the world doesn't notice. This is where the cycle ends, not with a grand revelation or a perfect transformation, but with a quiet refusal. A refusal to keep negotiating your existence. A refusal to keep waiting for permission to rest, to breathe, to feel joy that isn't tied to productivity or performance. A refusal to keep treating your soul like a resume that needs updating. You were never meant to be good enough. That idea was never yours. It was placed on you like a weight, passed down from wounded generations and broken systems and, well, meaning teachers who were just trying to survive. But survival is not the same as living. Living begins when you stop asking what the world wants from you and start asking what you want from yourself. Not from your ambition, not from your image, but from the quiet, aching center of your being, the part that remembers who you were before they told you who to be. That's where it begins. Not with becoming more, but with needing less. Not with self-improvement, but with self-return. And not with being enough, but with being free.